This is Rick with Yachting USA. We're produced by Yachting International Radio, and I have the pleasure and the privilege to be sitting with Joe Farrell today. Joey's the CEO of Resolve Marine.
Yep.
And this is fun. Thanks for joining us,
Yeah,
Joe.
thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. So a few episodes ago, we sat with your dad, and we talked about Mission Resolve, his philanthropy, and some of the fun things he likes to do with your assets and resources.
Yep.
Great conversation. And then we sat, I believe, with your sister, Lana, and Chauncey and Will a couple episodes ago to talk about the Resolve Academy. Mm-hmm. So this is kind of tying it all together. That's kind of, all of that came from what you're in charge of, really, if I understand the program. Resolve Marine is the main driving force of the Resolve program.
Yep. Yeah, and Resolve, my dad had started it about 40 years ago now, and always, wanting to do good and kind of return. I think what he saw was opportunities that he's had in life, and that's kind of where Mission Resolve is today. It's become from the parent company, but it was Resolve that got us here.
Right. And how long have you been with the company now?
I think, I honestly forget, it's 15 years, I have to guess. Maybe plus or minus one, but about 15.
All right.
So,
I noticed that we have something in common. We're alumni. I graduated at Florida Institute of Technology out of the Jensen Beach campus, and you out of Melbourne.
I sure did. That's right. Ocean Engineering.
Okay.
2009.
All right. Yeah. I was underwater technology back in 81.
All right. Wow.
So but it was a great school, a great way to get a maritime education and
had a great time.
And take it right to sea, which is what I did.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool.
So you, I think, have gotten a reputation at Sea Salvage, and there's certain projects that have really resonated. What would you point to if you had to point 2 or 3 really interesting projects that people might know about, or you'd want people to know about? Things that were different, challenging, things that other companies probably couldn't take on or wouldn't take on. Maybe it's a good way to look at it.
Sure. Yeah, I think, if I look back, and the lens I have is a very different one than somebody who's been working in the company for 20 years, because I saw the company grow as, a son of the founder, and which is, very different. I do remember the big milestones, right, though, and that was, back in the day. I think we've probably grown 10 times in 20 years. And I can remember, a big job was when you had, 12 or 15 people working for a couple of weeks on a job in the Caribbean. And,
right.
And then, things would happen, big events that we were brought in on. I think the DBL 152 was a tank barge that had capsized in the Gulf of Mexico. And that was a large operation for anybody. But for us, it was a big milestone because it was complex, right? And it was risky. And it was one of these jobs that, the big salvers did, and we did it, and we executed well. And that, when you do that kind of level of work, it puts you at a tier where then you can now benchmark and say, all right, we can do that kind of work. And it was under the Coast Guard jurisdiction, right? It was a tricky, complex job after a hurricane. So
what was the nature of that job?
It was a tank barge hit an underwater structure, and described basically a tank barge, and it capsized.
Okay.
And in the Gulf right after. One of the big hurricanes, and anyway, so we were contracted to do that work, and it actually didn't capsize immediately. It capsized while we were on site. Actually, it just had the vessel untied. Our flagship at the time was called the Lana Rose. It was a smaller Lana Rose than the recent one, but and anyway, it was a complex job, and it kind of put us at a new tier, right? And when people see you doing that work, that wasn't as big as some of the big jobs then, but over time we started doing that kind of work. And, post Katrina, a lot of the hurricane cleanup that we did for the U.S. Coast Guard, Deepwater Horizon.
Yeah,
right?
I think a lot of people are familiar with Deepwater Horizon. There's even a movie made about that situation. Right.
So we were contracted. Actually, we had been, we were not the main salver on that job, initially contracted. But we were hired to go out and support the firefighting efforts. So I was actually on a fireboat, our boat at the time, from a distance watching it burn, and it went down, and we were kind of like, well, that's the end of that, right? And, of course, little do we know, it was going to be a massive cleanup and spill. And we our input during that operation was we have a facility in the Gulf of Mexico in Theodore, Alabama. It's about 10 acres on the water. And we supported a tremendous amount of logistic operations. I think I was, at the time, me and like 2 other people were running 180 vessels just on a couple whiteboards. And it was mostly logistic support, but that was just that was the smallest job Resolve had at the time. And that was assigned to me because I was kind of junior. Me and, again, 2 other guys and we were running this massive thing. And, we were doing oil cleanup. We were doing decontamination. We were supplying fuel to these offshore sites. And so, that
a lot of moving parts going on.
A lot of moving parts. And, when you do that kind of work, it not only does it, you make money, but your workforce gets trained, you get more confident, you learn valuable lessons, right? And hopefully you capture those. And it just steps you up again. So I think those jobs were kind of like stepping stones to really just being able to professionalize the company. And, we're in a business and we're probably going to stay in the business of providing solutions to like unexpected problems, meaning you're never going to have much of a horizon for work.
Right. It's going to crop up, and then you respond as the opportunity shows.
And that's just what we're good at, And I think that that's something that we want to be better at. But no matter how hard we try, it's uncertain in nature. So there's this natural inclination of when you make money on these jobs is that you don't spend it, don't reinvest it because you don't know when the next one's coming. But I don't think that's the right attitude, and that's not the one we took. It was, let's grow and be bigger so we can do more of this stuff better, right?
Right.
And you have to balance that, of course, because no one's booking work for 2025 or next year.
No.
But there are a tremendous amount of I say value we bring to the general offshore market because things happen.
Right.
And for somebody to go try and figure out something for the first time, when they hire us, we're bringing 40 years of having, we saw something like that last week or last year. Yes. Where it says, you're going to try and figure it out. You might be able to, but you're going to learn some hard mistakes that we may have learned last decade.
Right. So I am going on a limb saying nobody wants to put it in their business plan. They're going to spend X dollars with the Resolve Marine.
Well, you should, though, because to be honest, if you look at some of these jobs, especially with these larger operators, day rates in the hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars a day, and to deliberate, if you have a solution to provide a partner. Yeah, and that's really where we're not.
There's the value,
right? Yeah, we can come in and make sure that we're going to put you back on track, and no one's ever going to second guess because you made the right decision by bringing in an expert. I think that's something that a lot of people find out the hard way is that you try and solve your own problem. Well, not only did you create the problem, but if you try and solve it and it's not optimal, or even if it is optimal, but more damage is done, people look at you. Bringing in outside support allows you to say, listen, I'm bringing in expertise. They have, again, 40 years of a track record of solving problems. And there's a bit more of a separation from even just the risk side. Even if you could solve it yourself, do you want to?
No.
So we bring that to the table. But again, that horizon, it's always going to be tight because no one's booking work for 2 years from now. Saying, I'm going to have a ship fire then.
No, not at all. Not at all. We were talking about one of your interesting projects. A ship cut the corner down in New Zealand. And,
that's right. The Rena.
Yeah. And when you looked at photos of the Rena and realized what you guys were up against, one day there you've got seas that are, half a meter, 1 meter, and a few days later you're in 10, 11 meter seas, and that's real. So how did you take that thing apart? I know, but everybody watching this would be fascinated to know how you got that ship broken down.
So it was, another, I think, a big milestone for us to do that size of a project. And it was, the ship was stuck on a reef that was basically like a really steep mountain. So that the waves that would be generated around it were tremendous, and you just couldn't bring in crane barges or any conventional assets because it would just sit there for weeks, and you'd be spending money on
a day rate that's ridiculous.
And maybe every week or two you'd be able to do a pick, and then you'd sit back, and it was just so we proposed using helicopters, and instead of going after 50 or 100 ton pieces, we said, can we, be productive enough to be competitive doing, 2 ton pieces, but a lot of them quick.
Right.
So we were able to actually, cut most of the ship down pretty much to the water line using the helicopter. And the whole thing was we'd, spend a day or two cutting where you basically make all these cuts, and then you stop just short of cutting the piece off. So you have these hangers. Yeah. And then when you were ready, everything would be pre-rigged. So you'd have like 20 or 30 pieces pre-rigged, and the helicopter would come out, and you would the cutters would have one on each side of the ship. So one on the stern, which was actually the midship because it had broken in half.
Yeah.
And the other was on the bow. And the helicopter would come, and I was on the radio, and I would just tell them, all right, go to the bow. And then they would grab a piece, and the cutters would finish cutting the piece, and they'd take the piece off. And now while they're cutting that, because the hangars were pretty significant,
I would think
the people on the other side were already cutting it, right, getting that last piece ready to go. And then so the helicopter would go drop off the piece to a landing craft, come back out to the stern or the whatever midship section was broken, and then the cutters would be done with that piece. And you basically we were getting around 40 tons a day at the end.
So you actually make it sound pretty freaking simple in so many ways, but no, I mean, when you're offshore working, oxycelling, cutting, heavy loads, helicopters, waves, movement, I just know from my own personal work experience, things move around and they don't always go the way you want. That's kind of dangerous work.
It is, yeah. There's a lot of hazard identification. You got to spend the time and say, what can go wrong here? How do we mitigate? And then kind of have a backup plan. So,
right.
In that situation, we did spend a lot of time putting like safety lines out everywhere because I myself took a spill and it was a 30-degree list, so you can't walk up that without support, right? No. So, we had fall harnesses, life jackets, comms with helicopters, and now even today we have, I would say, a more robust system. But when something happens, before you get into go to a new country, where's the helicopter? Where's the helicopter support for medevac? Where's the hospitals at? Where are you going to, and that has to be done ahead of time.
Yeah.
Because,
there's no doubt about it. We talked a little bit about some of the projects you can't talk about, but there's a whole network in place that brings you guys in. Mm-hmm. And I think one of those was the Francis Scott Key.
That's right. Yeah. So I can't get into the detail as we talked about of the job, but that operation, that every ship that comes to the U.S. has something called a salvage marine firefighting and an oil pollution response plan. And basically we are one of the providers that provide salvage marine firefighting. So for firefighting and ships that get stuck and things like the Dolly that happened. So when that incident occurred, we knew immediately that it was our job, which is great. So, the activation is instantaneous. There's times in the international market where a ship will burn, for instance, and it'll burn for 2 days before they sign somebody up. They'll be looking and competing and trying to price it out. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's because they think they have it under control, and the crews can extinguish a fire. So whereas in the U.S. it's basically the decision's been made by Congress 20 years ago is that no, you go, and if there's a fire, there's somebody to go, and you can always call us back. But I think the idea is that you want the resources going because it can take some time to staff them up. So the Dolly was one of those responses that we were engaged in. Right.
Or like we were speaking earlier off camera. You mentioned fires, and when I was going through your Resolve website, and I'd encourage anybody that's finding this interesting to go to your website and take a look at some of these projects you guys have done. Some incredible projects, but there seems to be one underlying theme: container ships and fires. Mm-hmm. And I hadn't really given that a lot of thought until you and I were talking, and it's like, you got a ship stacked full of containers from keel to many decks levels above the working deck. So you don't know what's in containers necessarily.
Yeah, and I think there's containers that are probably pretty benign until they heat up, and catch fire. A lot of times what you also see is misdeclaration. So people will call a whole container, again 40 feet by 8 by 8 kind of, or whatever the dimensions are, 9. Computer parts, but they're lithium ion batteries stacked, right? And it's a way to kind of get around, I think, and or maybe they're just genuinely not sure, but it's obvious if it's full of batteries, somebody was probably trying to avoid that declaration, because there is a special case, energy has to be put into managing hazardous cargoes. So the Dolly, I will say, was interesting because when the bridge did come down, all of the dangerous cargoes in the bow, and it literally hit all of the dangerous cargoes. So you can imagine that. So
Murphy's Law working.
Yeah, so So I think that the misdeclaration is a big issue, and also when you have different substances that aren't meant to mix, and you get into some storms and they mix and they catch fire. We've done a number of fires where the ship just had a mixing of cargoes that shouldn't have been together.
Right.
But no one's thinking about that, right? They load the boxes. They'll load them based on weight. They'll load them based on a few things, but generally they're not. They're just popping them in to try and get out of port as quick as possible. And because everybody wants their stuff quick and cheap, and if everyone had to spend time thinking about, well, should this not be next to that?
And these containers don't have built-in firefighting systems. No, they're contained. Yeah. So
it's contained. So when we if you have a ship full of grain or fertilizer or something, a bulker, one way to fight that fire if it's really out of control, and say you have 6 cargo holds, you might want to flood the cargo hold that's either on fire or even the one next to it to protect the next cargo holds, because you may have $20 million of cargo that you want to protect. Right. On a container ship, you can't really do that, because the containers they'll keep the water from hitting the
they contain the
container and but you get cars, right? You have electric vehicles, you get gas vehicles, you get all that stuff in there. And
I saw a little project you did where I think you were in Jacksonville with a car carrier.
That's right. Yeah. That was
it's a unique set of challenges.
Well, and the car carriers are tough because they everyone's ship's got its own devil, right? The car carriers like to tip. I should say they have a tendency to be able to tip over because they're just so tall, right? And
I mean, like what happened up there in
Georgia?
Yeah.
There's dozens of ships.
Is there
car carriers? Over. And when you fight the fire, the car decks, some of them they can articulate, move. Some of them are fixed, but the water will just sit there and kind of in the wedges. So the ship will catch a list, and you'll have 6 decks up, big wedge of water, which adds a lot more moment when it's 6 or 7 decks up versus when it. So we were basically fighting the fire and sending the naval architects and teams in to go.
Because the meta center of the vessel is completely changing on an hourly basis.
That's right. And if you remember, as the fire is burning, you're losing thousands of tons of cargo from various places. So you might be adding water up top while the cargo down there is burning, and you're actually reducing weight and adding it here.
That's the wrong way you want to go.
Well, and it's very scary because if you tip it over, now you've just created it's worse than the fire. It's one thing for a ship to burn in place if no one's on it, of course, and it's contained. Another thing to sink it there, because now you've created an environmental disaster. So it is. It's another challenge is dealing with these just different types of ships. Now you have LNG, you got ammonia powered, you got all sorts of different alternatives.
Wait till you see all the hydrogen-powered ships.
Hydrogen-powered, that's right. So now, take the dolly or a bridge and drop it on top of an LNG tank or a hydrogen tank, and it creates new challenges that we kind of have to work around.
Wow. So again, a little segue there. This isn't something where you go and buy yourself a couple ocean-going tugs and say, okay, I am too a salvage company. There's a lot of engineering that goes into this. This is you have naval architects and structural mechanical engineers, electrical engineers. I'm sure you've got a whole staff of professionals that are schooled in naval architecture and what you do with ships and structures.
I think, if you look back, maybe 30 more years ago, there was a model where owning a bunch of tugboats gave you an advantage, and a lot of the salvage was based on, ships would break down, you'd hook up a tow to it. But now it is really a complex problem you're trying to solve all the time, just based on the containerization, the size of these vessels. Now they're huge. The environmental awareness, right? Like there was a time when you could pump crude overside. 1960, 1950, your ship was going down, pump the oil out, just pump the fuel out, use them. So that's no longer an option, right? And I think that there's a need to have environmentally safe solutions it's really a service industry more now than it is an asset. Now we use tugs, we use heavy assets and cranes, but that's not going to give you the advantage. You need to have people with very niche toolbox of skills. And we have some of our salvage masters are like master electricians, chief engineers, chief masters, tankerman. They basically big range of skills, because you never know if you're going to be fighting a fire, lightering some type of LNG or product. Dealing with rewiring the ship's power to a generator because it lost it. I mean, there's a whole
Yeah.
So it's a very
skill set that right.
people driven,
and it's got to be happening.
That's it. Yeah, and that's the thing is people that are some firms an engineering plan is turned around in a week or 2 weeks or more, and for us it's a day. We need to have a solution in a day, and you're never going to have enough information to know. You just have to commit.
Right.
And that's a struggle. I'm an
those
engineer.
Dynamics are fascinating to me. Absolutely.
Say perfect is the enemy of good.
Well, I come from a business manufacturing, and we had a beautiful engineering department and did some amazing structural designs. The engineering process would be weeks on a project, sometimes months on a project before we cut the first piece of metal.
Right.
You don't have that luxury.
No, we don't.
No.
So, and that's a balance, and sometimes we're asked to bid a job, and there's a ship sinks in some country and overseas in Asia or Africa or Europe, and we have 2 weeks to put a full lump sum wreck removal in for a 6-month project.
Wow.
And that's not uncommon. And I think we've given feedback. We think that a little bit more time would probably get a better product to the customers, because you got to pad a lot of risk in there.
Yeah, of course you do.
But that's kind of the demand that's put on us.
Yeah.
They want to see ships sunk, and they need to tell the authorities they have a plan.
So I had a wonderful conversation a couple weeks ago with Laura Sherrod. She's with New Coast Financial and Insurance, and she underwrites, and they're involved in a lot of white boat.
All right.
I haven't dug deep to see how deep they go into commercial, but the point is, the insurance underwriters are a fundamental piece of this puzzle.
Absolutely.
They drive a lot of what your business looks like. What are your relationships with underwriters, and how do you work with insurance companies to affect what you do?
I would say, and just like a ballpark, probably around half the time we are getting paid through an insurance company. Now, that doesn't mean we're getting the work through them, and a lot of times they might be reimbursing the vessel owner. So while the vessel owner can hire us, they might have a deductible and then get covered. It's really the claims departments, because the underwriters, by then they underwrote the insurance, the premiums paid, and they get paid. The claims people in that department are the ones that are, the ship's sinking, or the ship's on, sunk, or a hurricane hit, the yacht's on the beach and we got to pull it off. We're actually doing, a yacht down in Puerto Rico right now. And, actually that one's different. That's being handled. I think that's being handled through the Coast Guard. So there's just depending on the situation, really, who the customer is. But our relationship with the insurers is important, in that we are constantly going to them and trying to pitch the fact that, hey, you don't want this to happen, but when it does, you want somebody that can be trusted, because if you don't do it right the first time, you're going to have somebody back there. And there's times when three people have been contracted and they paid for a job 3 times, right? And,
wow. Yeah. Well, you get what you pay for most often.
That's right.
In this industry, most industries, I think that's a reality check. And I've seen it myself, where people are trying to save a couple bucks by cutting a corner or going with the low bid. And rarely does that pay off.
Rarely.
So that's I think the takeaway when you look at everything in the big picture. And that's kind of why I'm enjoying this conversation with you. It ties so closely to what your dad's done, your sister's done. I think I'm going to point back to Lana and what her program with Resolve is, because what I just heard you tell me in the last half an hour or so is that you've educated, and you've got a labor base, a skill set, a pool of people, professionals that are at the top of their game. You don't get much better, more experience than what you guys do. And now you've got Resolve Academy that are bringing in new maritime students, people that want to get their STCW and join the maritime industry. Where better to go to get the skill sets and the experience, the depth of experience that exists.
Agreed.
Even if you're going into luxury yachts and white boats, a lot of the boats that are being built now are small ships, and these vessels are going into remote places where the skill set of being a mariner is real. And I see these connections. I love connecting the dots for all of this.
No, it's very. Training is important. We train a lot of our workforce on the job, but it's very hard to train a crew to fight a fire, assuming the ship doesn't burn and you don't want it to ever catch fire. And it's interesting because every day we're doing something that somebody's never seen before, right? Like most of the companies we serve, it's their first time, but it's every single day. And for us, it's obvious, like you'd want this training, you'd want this kind of miscommunication, but for so many companies, they just never had the problem. And it's just like me selling you house fire insurance, right? You're like, yeah, okay, get out of here. Yeah, I'm a better insurance, right? I'll be better fighting your house fire. And you're like, yeah, it's never going to catch fire, so don't worry. But meanwhile, you're sitting there every day watching, like, well, there's another one. And I think that it's when we do try and convey that message, like, it matters. The training is so important, because when something does happen, that limited amount of time that you've had to actually know what it is to put all the mechanics together, the hose to the pump, to actually turn the thing on and get in a hose team and all that is so that's, if you haven't done it, it's really hard to do the first time. And a lot of it is not, and Chauncey will tell you, it's not about so much as getting having the fire and actually having a real fire to put out, which we do, right? It's really about the logistics and the teamwork that it takes just to get organized enough and to travel down a deck or two and to turn a corner and then approach. And that in itself, even if there was no fire, that would be valuable, because if you're doing it for the first time in the real situation, there's a very good chance you're going to fail, right? Fail being you're going to be abandoning the ship.
And time is not on your side.
It's not on your side. You don't have the time. You don't have the time to double check. And that's another thing, is that teamwork, that trust, and having done it and walked through, our simulator, and understanding that like there's a challenge even just wearing the equipment and experiencing and trying to get yourself and the equipment to the target or the fire. That in itself,
before you actually take the action of fighting fire.
Right.
I actually had the luxury, privilege, however you want to look at it, of being in your fire simulator here at the port. You guys had just done some training previously. Chauncey walks me in. It's 140 degrees in there. The touch in the metal, it's still hot in places. Yeah. The damage control room was like, wow, look at that, with measuring, water heights on the bulkheads. Yeah. And I walked out of there going, this is real. This is I don't know where else you go and get, full on.
The military?
Yeah, I guess so.
They go to a real fire. So, I think that's been our objective with the training the whole time, is that you don't want to expose people to real danger to train, because, but at the same time, you want to experience the feeling of the threat of failure is not an option. And I think that level of stress, you want to be able to build it to the point where people become comfortable in the heat, wearing the gear, being wet or cold or hot, and just, you have to get through that. You want to get through that in the training time. You want to do 2 of those cycles on a training environment where you can say, hold on a second, and then you take a breath, hold on, and you can kind of reset. And because then when you're doing it for the real time, you already know what that's going to be like. And you're like, I've already felt this heat. That's normal, right?
Yeah.
Put bunker gear on for the first time, and you get in that burner box, and it is hot. I mean, you're burning. And if you didn't have somebody there sitting there saying, no, this is normal. You might run out.
Well, what's wrong with this picture?
You might run out the door.
Right.
Because you're like, this is crazy hot. And if you get a little bit of water on your sleeve, it burns. And now don't get water on you, because it'll burn you. And little nuanced things like that, I think, are the difference between a successful putting that fire out or not. So
no, that brings back some memories too. Yeah. So I was there. I saw a door on the top deck of your firefighting. It's the Oriskany door, and I think there's a Oriskany porthole.
That's right.
You were involved in that sinking, right?
Resolve was, to be fair, I was still at. I think I was taking my finals at Maritime.
Okay.
Engineering.
Now I'm bringing this up because a lot of people that know me know that I'm a very avid technical diver.
All right. Have you dove the Oriskany?
I have dove the Oriskany.
Okay, cool.
And that's an amazing ship to dive. I found that as first of all, there's a lot of work to get any vessel ready to be sunk intentionally as an artificial reef.
Absolutely.
That's a big freaking vessel.
Yeah.
What is it?
1,000 feet.
1,000 feet flight deck. She sits in 212 feet of water. At least that's where the sand is. And I believe, actually, if you were to penetrate her and get to the real keel, you're probably closer to 230 feet.
Yeah.
So I dove her with Trimix, and we got down onto the hangar deck, and went down the escalator area. And,
cool.
and those who don't know that you go from being in an exterior open water environment to a overhead environment, essentially cave diving on a wreck. And it's almost like the holy grail of technical diving to a certain extent. It's big. It's deceptively.
I'd imagine.
Yes. Yeah. It's deceptive in the risks that are there, but the spectacular experience of being in this space in 170 feet of water and just looking at the immensity of what you guys put on the bottom of the ocean. What a cool program.
I'm glad. I'm not a technical diver, so I probably won't ever get to dive that depth.
Yeah, never say never there, Joe. You know, you're young enough that never know when that bug bites you. But
fair enough.
no, I just like making these connections because I think Resolve's done some really cool things. Your dad with Mission Resolve, I give him nothing but kudos and credit for what he's accomplished there. And I promise one of these days I'm going to bring the bamboo story to the table here, because when Chauncey and your dad told me that story, it's like, wow, you know, that's the real deal.
Yep, I've seen the footage. It was pretty crazy.
Yeah, no, it is. So we'll leave that as a cliffhanger. Joey, I really appreciate you taking some time with us today and letting us talk about Resolve. You guys are amazing. I'm just so pleased to have this relationship, and we'll continue this and find another opportunity to sit down and have another conversation.
Sounds great.
Yeah,
really
maybe a beer in one of your.
Sounds good.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Great. So Joey, thanks again.
Thank you.
This has been Rick Thomas, host of Yachting USA. Until the next time, I'm out of here.